knew the cost of our journey, and we paid the price 100 times. Finally, the time has come to build the last city on Earth.
Frostpunk. Set in an alternate late 19th century where the sun is dimmed by a volcanic winter, this city builder is a unique take on a post-apocalyptic world covered in snow. Having played and enjoyed 11-Bit Studios' previous game, This War of Mine, and with the release of Frostpunk 2 just around the corner, it felt fitting to immerse myself in the icy landscapes of Frostpunk. So in this retrospective review, we'll find out whether the coal burnt brightly enough to keep me engaged, or did my attention fizzle out and freeze. Developed by 11-Bit Studios, a Polish developer featuring ex-CD Projekt Red members, this team is all too familiar with crafting emotionally charged narratives amidst themes of war and struggle. The main difference with this title though is that it's now a city builder. But don't let the genre fool you, this game can definitely feel pretty challenging. Perhaps it was a skill issue on my end, but I definitely had trouble in this game. Having been told This War of Mine was a pretty tough game and feeling like I got through that relatively unscathed, I didn't expect Frostpunk to be too overwhelming, but I got stuck on the first scenario. This is probably the first game where I actually looked for a guide this early on. Generally, I only look up guides when I'm trying to find all the collectibles or secrets, or if I really get stuck at a point, but in Frostpunk I was looking for help after about 4 hours in. Now, when it comes to the story, I really didn't expect there to be much here. I mean, the last game in this genre I played was probably SimCity, and I don't remember there being any meaningful story in that game. Frostpunk differentiates itself by giving the player something to care about, which in my opinion was not only the right choice, but it was done well. Throughout your playthrough, you'll get the chance to enact laws that determine the direction of life in this frozen world. Each one of your decisions will not only have a greater impact on your city, but on you as well. At least emotionally. Like, do I amputate the man with frostbite? Do I choose the path of religion or law? Do I banish people for theft? Do I force people to only consume soup? Questions such as these will be pretty regular, and both the story beats and gameplay pressure will both start to add up and feel very constant. Especially when you can select and look at each of the individual citizens of your colony. There are definitely still pre-scripted, timed or triggered events that will come up, but the story impact of each isn't lessened. In fact, even though much of the narrative is delivered through text, the longer your colony survives and the more laws you pass, the more your emotions are heightened. Having gotten through This War of Mine feeling pretty unscathed emotionally, I thought Frostpunk wouldn't be too bad, but the little moments that pop up can hit pretty hard. Granted, there's a certain level of RNG involved, and you can save scum if you really want to, but I'd probably recommend against it if you really want to see where this game can go. As expected, the world of Frostpunk is a really gritty and raw experience that will test the player's resolve and decision making, especially at the latter stages of each scenario, where things feel more akin to a dystopia of overzealous religious fanatics or a totalitarian government ruled through might. When it comes to the graphics, this game is simply gorgeous. The developers have really managed to capture the beauty of a snow-covered land whilst also illustrating the bleak, desolate nature of it. As your colony develops, huge plumes of billowing smoke begin to rise over cold, monstrous-looking metallic structures. Your generator may burn a bright, fiery orange, but the unrelenting, bitter white ice claws at both your city and your screen alike. A sign of the impending frost that's constantly threatening to envelop your people. And though the dirty black and burnt coal is filthy, it's the only thing keeping your unclean hands from the biting frost. Funnily enough, I think the most impressive thing is that the game itself doesn't feel particularly demanding or resource heavy. So even with all the visual effects set to max, even the humblest of automatons should be able to run this without too many issues. Now, the art style. Though the style itself comes across as simple, it's quite unique and well detailed and thought out. Like, you can tell there's backstory and reasoning behind each of the designs. Automatons have tall legs to easily navigate the snow. People each carry their own personal heater to stay warm. Like it's all thought out. And the aesthetic and influence of the coal and steampunk ties in really well with not only the time the game is set in, but the nature of the situation. It's also pretty refreshing to see a post-apocalyptic future that's set in an ice age, which I don't think I've seen too many IPs do. I mean, the last big one from recent memory is probably Snowpiercer, which touches on a lot of eerily similar issues. Now, the music. It's just beautiful. Like, it's probably one of the best soundtracks I've heard this year, and I don't think it's particularly flashy or overdone. It's just a captivating piece that feels like it belongs in a big budget movie. I mean, I didn't end up finishing every scenario because of the time constraints I was under, so I can't really comment on variety. But on the first level toward the end, things get cranked up to another level. And as traumatizing as the gameplay might have felt, the musical score really just pushes the whole experience to the edge. I also couldn't find any info on the budget for this game, but I think it's one of those AA games that can really punch above its weight class, something like Hellblade or A Plague Tale: Innocence, and the musical score is proof of that. I mean, as if the moral choices aren't enough, the music really just elevates the entire feel and is such a perfect addition to a game where you're already so heavily invested in.
There's plenty to do.
Okay, sound design. I'm not entirely sure what it is, and it might just be personal preference, but there was something about the sound design in this game that felt really satisfying to me. The way it acknowledges player input, prompts for construction, researching new tech, or just navigating the menu all sounded really good to me. Like there's a crisp and tactile feel to the sound that just delighted me. From the blaring of the horn in the morning, to opening up the building menu, from the howling of the chilling wind, to the passing of a new law, it all has that oomph. I mean, maybe I was too emotionally involved and had started to associate success with those noises, but to me it was just gratifying. Like, considering how dark and bleak the world felt and how the noises themselves aren't even that complex, I think the devs have really outdone themselves with this one.
Get going! Time to earn your bread.
Now, although there isn't too much of it, the voice acting, in my opinion, is also really well done.
New law!
There's not a lot of variety, I suppose, but what's there has been acted pretty well.
It feels as yesterday we were turning the wheels of progress. Until the frost stopped it all.
The variety is probably the biggest drawback, but in a city builder, it's not really necessary anyway. And considering how demanding the gameplay can be, I'm more surprised they put in any at all. Now, gameplay. Whilst I was looking for help on this game, I read a comment in the vein of, "This is a puzzle game dressed up as a city builder," and I think this one comment hit the nail on the head. To me, there's a constant feeling that you need to follow a set path rather than having the option to experiment. And I mean, like, multiple times I felt like I had made a decision early on that I regretted later on down the track. The way you progress just feels sort of like you're going through a labyrinth, and if you hit a dead end, you need to reload a save, otherwise things can spiral out of control really quickly. And yes, as much as I didn't want to, I was definitely save scumming in this game. I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, Shadow Tactics, a real-time tactics game, received some criticism about the lack of alternative paths, but it was still a great game. Look, the developers have definitely set out to create something unique, and in that sense, I think they've succeeded. The design of the game is intended to keep the player feeling the tension the entire time, because you always feel like you're just hovering on the edge. A bleak balance struck between a warm soup and the biting frost. But the game itself isn't without its faults. I think the devs became so focused on ensuring that the balance exists, which mind you is challenging, that they've lost focus on making the game itself easy to play. And I don't mean making the game easy, but ensuring the player understands the guidelines or rules that the creators have set up in the first place. I'll give you an example. I was at like 10 hours in before I realized that coal thumpers required multiple gathering posts to support it. So though I had plenty of them digging, I was constantly baffled while I was hitting max capacities. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm probably an idiot for not realizing this, but when I looked through the tutorial notes, it came up as the very last hint.
What?
Another example. Even though your people will happily march through the snow without a path to collect resources when you first start out, As soon as you construct a building to collect resources, you need to construct a road to it or it just won't operate. Like, why? It just feels like the game itself is not only difficult by intention, but difficult because of poor design. Now, speaking of difficult, Frostpunk to me, for lack of a better phrase, is the Souls-like of city builders. It's like SimCity if it was just constant tornadoes and earthquakes and riots and fires. I mean, I'm sure this won't be everyone's experience, but for me personally, this game was addictively painful. Feeling like you're constantly on the edge is super stressful, and that feeling only increases until finally you're judged. I mean, your judgment is delivered in a really stylish showcase of how your city progressed, but you're judged nonetheless. By design, the developers have created something challenging and special with this game, but the torment isn't without its own rewards. There are little hints of goodness along the way that are surprisingly touching, even if they're few and far between. And though it is a battle, your city's survival after all the stress and trauma you endure, you are treated with a feeling of relief and elation. Something I'd imagine is akin to defeating a boss in a Souls-like game.
We, the survivors, doomed by our own mistakes.
Look, I can't say I'll come back to this genre just because of how torturous this experience was for me personally, but I can definitely understand the appeal. The lows drop like the temperature and the highs are short-lived, but Frostpunk is undeniably unique in both its execution and style. And for all its faults, the distinct intricacies and details really help the game shine, and the amount of work that's been put in is incredible. This little title is frustratingly addictive and painful in equal measure, but there's still enough time to finish it before the launch of the sequel. If you're a city builder nerd, you probably have already tried this, but if you haven't, you definitely should. This unrelenting pain in my frostbitten ass is absolutely still worth playing in 2024. If you've managed to sit through this whole video, thank you so much for watching. I'm still looking to upload a brand new video once a fortnight, but be sure to let me know what else you'd like to see in the comments. Thanks again for watching. Hopefully, I'll catch you in the next one.